Greetings family, Sister Shanice here. I want to thank you so much for joining me on the Sister Shanice Show. We are broadcasting from Amaze TV and they are indeed amazing. So if you are new to my channel, you can subscribe via YouTube. So go to YouTube and search for the Sister Shanice Show, and there you will find about 80 or so shows, and they are powerful. They are deeply insightful shows. So do at your leisure take a look, and very importantly, subscribe and share. So I'm also a presenter on Galaxy Afiwi, which is an African-centered radio station, and I do my shows there on a Wednesday from 10 a.m. through to 1 p.m. and you can get us online. I also upload my shows on SoundCloud, so you can go to SoundCloud and look for Sis Shanice and go to tracks, and there are over 200 shows or so there for you to select from. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on the show today. As always, we have a very interesting show lined up for you, and I do have some guests in the studio as well. Well, today's show is going to be about the sale of stolen African artifacts. Now, you would think it would be a criminal offense, right, to be selling stolen treasures? Well, that certainly doesn't seem to be the case in this instance, or where European institutions are concerned. Many of you who are aware of your history will be aware that over the centuries, European explorers have actually looted, pillaged, and amassed an extensive wealth of African arts and treasures. And those of you who live in the UK or Paris, or where they have some of these wonderful museums, you know, you may well have had the opportunity to go and see some of these beautiful, exquisite, ancient pieces of African art that are housed in their museums. Well, although we've been able to benefit significantly from Europe by being able to go to these museums to see these works of art, if you live in Africa, you are obviously going to be denied the opportunity of seeing and viewing and appreciating some of this wonderful work of ancient art. And I suppose it's particularly concerning for young people because, you know, for educational purposes, you would want your young people in your country to be able to appreciate the wealth of treasures that your country actually possesses, and the historical information and the cultural connection to those pieces of art. So the young people in Africa have been denied all of that. And in recent terms, there's been decades of campaigning from African organizations and African governments to get these works of art returned. You know, some of them include, for example, Nigerians' Benin bronzes, which were seized and looted by the British Army in the late 19th century and is presently housed in the British Museum. And some of you may also recall quite recently as well, Ethiopia managing to successfully get some of their ancient treasures returned on a loan basis. Well, you know, these campaigns have been gathering momentum, and could that be why it seems that under the cover of COVID-19 and all of the focus being on that, suddenly we discovered that Sotheby's and Christie's have announced plans to sell off some of these African treasures. The British auction house Sotheby's have announced up-and-coming auctions of the historically rare African and oceanic art. Sotheby's claim to be the only auction house to hold regular African and oceanic auctions throughout the year. And in the two principal selling locations of New York in May and November, and Paris in June and December. And we also have announcements by Christie's, who are actually merged with Sotheby's, who are going to be involved as well in the British auction house selling of these wonderful, exquisite Asian African pieces of art. Wow. There is a catalogue available that they've made available, so you can see some of the treasures that they're planning to sell. And one such piece, for example, includes the Akan terracotta head from Ghana, the Benin bronze, and the Yoruba figure from Nigeria. And these artifacts is from all over Africa, including Gabon, as I mentioned, Ghana and Nigeria. There's a Democratic Republic of Congo. Treasures as well are valued between $30,000 to $900,000 a piece. And now the sale of these Asian African treasures, you know, for some organizations, they're saying has to be stopped, because these treasures, they're arguing, need to be securely held and returned to the country of their origin. And at this moment, I'd like to introduce to you two of the guests that I've got who are going to be joining me in the studio to have a discussion about these pieces. My first guest is Keturah Amokom, and she is the Prime Minister and Minister of Reparations for the State of African Diaspora for the 6th region. And I also have in the studio for my second guest, Taiwo Oshiemu, and she is the author and entrepreneur and author of the book Rent to Rent, Massive Cash During a Massive Crash. So we are going to turn to my guests at this stage. First of all, let me bring into the studio and the discussion Keturah Amokom, who is the Vice Prime Minister, as I've said, for the Minister of Reparations, State of the African Diaspora. Sister Keturah, welcome to the Sister Shanice Show.
Thank you very much for having me, Shanice. I'm very pleased to be here and very blessed for you to invite me down. Thank you so much.
It's a privilege and an honor. And I have here a copy of the letter from the State of the African Diaspora, which is saying that as a matter of extreme urgency, you're calling on the various museums and auction houses to cease and desist from their sale and their anticipated sale of these treasures. First of all, I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about why you felt that there was the need to send this very strong letter to the various museums and auction houses.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Shanice. Just to let your viewers know, I'm Keturah Amokom, the Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Repatriation for the State of the African Diaspora. We are an international governmental organisation, and we will be seeking recognition of such from the United Nations. So we had to answer to this atrocity, again another atrocity of selling our artefacts. Our Prime Minister has been working on restitution of our cultural treasures for a long time now, and he has already secured an agreement from President Macron to return the artifacts from France to Benin, and they have started the process, but it's been very minimal. Now, when we saw this particular article come out again, and we did our research, obviously this has been going on for some time. I traced their auctions going back to 2006. They have millions of our artifacts all over the world. There's some we may not even recover because they're in private collections. So we have to now, whatever they've got left, I know there are catacombs under the British Museum that are housing our artifacts that are still in their original wrappings. They probably haven't been catalogued. They probably haven't been, graded as to where they've come from. I have information that they are also stored in Greenwich. So these are the places that we would like our people on the ground in the UK came to start to lobby these people with the letter that we've already circulated, if they could be hand delivered to these areas, to the relevant places, so that they are aware, that we are aware, that, you know, with all the global unrest, that they may be seeking to offload all these artifacts for very substantial prices, because these are antiquities, and they do range in, like you quite rightly said, not just into the hundreds of thousands, but into the millions. So we need to recover our ancient artifacts. They are our spiritual, they're part of our spiritual body. They know when they took them that they were capturing much of our spirit, and we need to release them. We need to claim them. And so we as the state have a program by which all our people can participate to get our artifacts back. And it will take us, and we will have that mandate to do that, each and every one of us. And I will release this information on how we do that through heritage foundations that each one of us can set up to literally go in there and walk in there and say, this belongs to me. And I'm taking it back home to my ancestral home and origins.
Thank you very much for that. And let me just read a paragraph from the letter that I'm looking at and that you were just referring to. It says here, as a matter of extreme urgency, we issue this cease and desist order letter to instruct you to immediately stop, suspend, terminate, discontinue and cancel all and any future sales, auctions, online sales, biddings, private and public arrangements of sale of any and all African cultural artifacts and antiquities, including Aboriginal art, which were looted, pillaged and stolen during the periods of colonization. We understand from your establishments, we understand that your establishments are in the possession of and has been in the possession of such African cultural artifacts and antiquities. We also understand that your establishments are in the process of and have been in the past selling, auctioning and by private arrangement sales and public sales disposing of such stolen and looted artifacts. And that letter has been addressed to Christie's and all other locations thereof, Sotheby's, Bonham's, Freeman's, auctions, all institutions holding African artifacts, museums and private collections, online African antiquity merchants. At this stage, I'd like to bring into the discussion Taiwo, who is the author of the best-selling book Rent to Rent, Massive Cash During a Massive Crash. And Taiwo, you are from Nigeria, and some of these antiquities and arts that we're talking about is actually from your country. Can you share with us, please, what does it mean to you to know that these museums and auction houses are potentially planning to sell off the very same treasures that organizations in your country have been campaigning to have returned for so many years?
Thank you very much, Sister Shanice, for bringing me on this issue. Indeed, I am Nigerian, and I am specifically from the Yoruba tribe. And as you mentioned earlier, Yoruba tribe is one of the most dispersed tribes during the transatlantic, slavery. And our art is one of those that's been massively pillaged during this time. And to have to see, to witness these atrocities, which is to sell off, the museum selling off what belongs to my people, is heart-crunching. And one thing that shows me is that these museums, these governments are desperate. They know they are losing out. They are desperate. They are hungry for money.
Yes.
And what is going on right now is criminal.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Criminal against my people. Because we have been requesting for our artifacts to be returned because we did not give them to you. You stole them from us. You murdered our ancestors, the keepers of these artifacts that have been keeping them for centuries, for thousands of years, you murdered them and you took them away because you want the descendants of these people to be completely lost.
Yes. Taiwo, thank you very much for that. Absolutely agree with you. You know, it ought to constitute a criminal offence. You know, these are artifacts. They're actually symbolic of, you know, the culture and the heritage of a people who have already been so traumatized for hundreds of years during the, you know, the transatlantic slave trade. And, you know, the idea that was looming to be reunited and reconnected with, you know, the arts and the treasures of, you know, our people now suddenly could end up in private houses and private collections and lost again to Africa for many hundreds of years to come if this isn't stopped. If I can go back to Keturah. Keturah, how you touched on how people listening can actually get involved. Now, is there a website or somewhere where they can go to get the letter, to download it? Can you please give us some more instructions? And also, will there be a petition? You know, will we be expected to lobby our MPs and our councillors? What more can we be doing to help and assist to ensure that these treasures don't get lost, you know, to Africa for many more centuries to come?
Yes, so I did have a change.org campaign. I launched it last year when they wanted to loan back our artifacts, which is not an option, and it's not something that, you know, we are going to accept. So I'm going to change that change.org site to the restitution of the artifacts and to shut down all the auctions and sales of the auction houses. And also to the museums to disclose inventories of what they have in their storehouses and in their catacombs. Our Prime Minister secured a resolution at the European Union, and I'll just read you Article 7, which says that Article 7 and 8 recalls that some member states have taken steps toward meaningful and effective redress for past injustices and crimes against humanity, bearing in mind their lasting impacts in the present against people of African descent. Calls for the EU institutions and the remainder of the member states to follow this example, which may include some form of reparations, such as offering public apologies and the restitution of stolen artifacts to their countries of origin. So we want to force them into implementing these resolutions, that they do sit down with a meaningful dialogue so that we can actually have strategic plans on getting our artifacts restituted. Now, that meeting was supposed to happen in January this year, February this year. Then we see the COVID kick off, and that was cancelled. So we are not sleeping on this. As soon as the European Union regains their schedule, we will be lobbying back to the European Union to have this dialogue. In the meantime, we will be trying to get an injunction for these auction houses, museums, etc., not for our artifacts to leave like the catacombs, and not for the auction houses to have any more auctions of our artifacts. So we're seeking legal and international injunctions so that when we can have this meaningful dialogue with the EU, where and who bought the artifacts and when. And I know I've seen on the website that it goes back to 2006. So we want an inventory and their data of all their sales of these artifacts so that we can trace where they have gone, and so that they can be restituted. So we have got the mandate from the, we have a plan of implementation, strategic planning to get our artifacts returned.
Yes, yes, and wow. You know, when you consider that a crime was committed centuries ago, and we can't turn back the clocks, we can't undo the crimes that were committed against us centuries ago. But, you know, clearly what can be done today is, you know, those in the powers that be can do the right thing to correct and amend and redress as best they can. And that's what you would expect. But, you know, under the cover of this COVID now, what seems to be happening is quite underhanded and quite concerning indeed, especially, you know, as you've mentioned that they were around the table, you were sitting around the table, so to speak, and having discussions about, you know, how and when these treasures could be returned back to Africa. And I would imagine that, you know, African governments and institutions there would have been putting in place, you know, museums and celebrations for the return of these artifacts. So, you know, this news and this proposal by Sotheby's and Christie's is devastating indeed. We're going to come back to you in a short while, Keturah. I just want to go back to Taiwo for some further comments from her, you know, in her capacity as a Nigerian who, you know, whose children and children's children, I would imagine, you know, could potentially benefit hugely from, you know, having access to this cultural arts and all of this information that you are campaigning to get. So back to you, Taiwo. You know, I just want to hear further about what it means to you as a Nigerian and to your people in Nigeria to get the artifacts back to your country.
Thank you, Sister Shanice. First of all, what this means to me right now is the fact that the Europeans are absolutely unrepentant for all the things, all the destruction and pains they've caused to our people. It's a blatant slap in our faces. In fact, it's a continuation of what they have done. And to be standing here as a victim of what they have done is unforgivable. And what I want to say to those who intend to put their monies to purchase this artifact, just know that you might perhaps be the keepers of those artifacts today, but better believe that my children will come and get those from you one day. You are nothing but dust keepers right now. You will never own those objects. They belong to African people. They belong to our people. Sooner or later, you will no longer have your hands on those artifacts.
Yeah, so good advice. You know, don't waste your money and buying them because, you know, as Sister Taiwo has just made clear, you know, you won't actually be the owners of those, just a temporary keeper. And do you really want to spend millions or close to £1 million or $1 million on treasures that will never really be yours? And, you know, going back to Sister Keturah, you said that an inventory is being compiled of all of the treasures and where they are. I would imagine that already, because of the sales, as you've mentioned, have been going on for, you know, well over a decade now, that quite a lot of these African treasures are already in private homes. Will you be able to get an inventory of where they are and who the keepers of those treasures are?
Where and who bought the artifacts and when. And I know I've seen on the website that it goes back to 2006. So we want an inventory and their data of all their sales of these artifacts so that we can trace where they have gone and so that they can be restituted. So we have got the mandate from the State of the African Diaspora, has the mandate from the Congo, a written mandate from the Minister of Tourism that gives us the authority to stand in their stead to restitute and to find out where their artifacts are. So we have sent our letter from the Minister of Tourism to all the auction houses, explain that we are legally authorized to investigate and find out Congolese artifacts you know, where they are, how many they have, you know, where they went, and also the British Museum, and under their catacombs, we will be insisting through the legal framework that we have the authority to conduct these investigations. So our strategy is that we are working with the kings and queens in Africa. We've just signed an MOU with the King of Benin, and the artifacts that belong to that particular kingdom, or that king, or even that region of kings, we have the mandate to act on their behalf here in the West, and in the UK and in America, to interface with them to get the information where their artifacts are. So this is the work that we are doing.
Thank you so much. Your works is just so important, not just for today's generations, but for generations to come. We want to thank you so much for all that you're doing. We would like everyone that's watching this channel, watching this show, to get involved in this campaign, to, you know, put pressure on the British Museum, Sotheby's, Christie's, and all the other auction houses and museums that have got these African treasures, that they will cease from attempting to sell them. You know, we recognize there's an economic crisis right now, and that's what tends to happen during times of economic crash. People go to their treasures to sell them for money, but these treasures are not for sale. And so we're calling on all of the good people out there to join us in our campaign to bring back those invaluable treasures, those cultural arts that mean so much to Africa. We want you to join us in our campaign so that they are reunited again with their rightful owner. I want to thank my guests, Sister Keturah and Sister Taiwo, for joining me in the studio today. Thank you so much. And all of our listeners who have been tuned in to the Sister Shanice Show, I want to thank you so much. There's a job for all of us to do. This work that's needed goes beyond, you know, our lifetime, and we need to make a commitment today to our future generations that we are all going to do what we can to make sure that these treasures, these African cultural arts and all of its treasures, are not sold off, but returned to their rightful owners. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Sister Shanice Show. If you haven't already subscribed, please go to YouTube, search for Sister Shanice. Sister is spelt with the A. Sister Shanice Show, the Sister Shanice Show. Please subscribe and share. Thank you so much. Keep it locked for our next show that's going to be coming back at you. More love, more power, and more voodoo. Sister Shanice out of here.